Good evening. I'm Erica Lai, president of APAPA DC. Thank you so much for joining us for the Vietnamese Fishermen's Association versus the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan trial reenactment. This annual trial reenactment has become a marquee event for our bar. It celebrates the history and the experiences of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, or AAPIs, but also brings to light critical civil rights issues that have affected our community. Before we begin, I'd like to note that closed captioning is available for the reenactment. This can be enabled on your Zoom view if you click on the CC for closed caption button on the bottom of your screen, and you can select to show subtitles and/or show the transcript on your side panel. Now, for any of you who might be new to APAPA DC, it is the oldest and largest voluntary bar association of AAPI lawyers, judges, and other legal professionals in the DC metropolitan area. For the past 4 decades, we have endeavored to serve as a voice for this community, to elevate and promote our community's advancement, and to give back to our community. Tonight's event has become an annual tradition for us. Normally, we'd be gathered in the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals' grand ceremonial courtroom for this reenactment, and we'd follow this with a lovely reception in the Dolly Madison house next door. While we hope to return to that next year, I'm thrilled that we're able to resume reenactments this year virtually, especially for our 40th anniversary year. Although the Vietnamese fisherman case is from the 1980s, it remains resonant today, especially as our community is once again the target of troubling acts of discrimination, this time across the country, as we've seen through the horrifying Atlanta mass shooting and the violent attacks against our elders in New York, California, and elsewhere. We are especially thankful for all of the support that you and the DC and legal communities writ large have shown us at this time. And we are committed to continuing to offer programming and resources to help combat AAPI hate. We are overwhelmed by the turnout we've had at recent events, including tonight. We at APAPA DC are immensely grateful to all of the judges who have invested considerable time in this reenactment, not just tonight, but during all the rehearsals. Tonight's very impressive cast includes Federal Circuit Judge Raymond Chen, District Court of the District of Columbia Judges Zia Faruqi and Amit Mehta, District of Maryland Judge Theo Chuang, U.S. Civilian Board of Contract Appeals Judge Jerry Summers, D.C. Superior Court Judges Errol Arthur, Kelly Hagashi, Florence Pan, and Jason Park, D.C. Department of Employment Services Judge Gwen D'Souza, Fairfax County Circuit Court Judge Sean Tran, and Baltimore City Circuit Court Judge Jenny Hong. Thanks too to our directors Anina Shu and Caroline Chan for all their help fine-tuning the presentation. We are also deeply appreciative of all of the support from our innumerable community sponsors who play such a critical role in helping us spread the word about tonight's event, as well as to our platinum sponsor, Wiley Ryan. I would also like to personally thank Anjum Anwala and Melissa Nanaka, who have worked tirelessly to pull off this event. I could not ask for a better or more effective community affairs team. Now, a couple of final logistical points. Thanks to our sponsor, Wiley Ryan, tonight's event includes CLE credit for California, New York, and Illinois. The emails that have been sent out with the Zoom details for this presentation have included a CLE sign-in sheet that you will need to complete if you're seeking CLE credit. We will be providing a compliance code in the chat box during the event that you will need to include on your CLE form. Please return a scanned copy of your completed and signed CLE sign-in sheets to Anjum and Melissa at apapadc.communityaffairs@gmail.com. We will drop that info into the chat box. Also, after our reenactment, although we can't mingle and chat at the Dolly Madison house just yet, we will move to a virtual networking portion with our esteemed judicial cast. We will provide a separate Zoom meeting link in the chat box at the end of the event for those of you who would like to join. Now, all of the reenactments we've put on over the years, on the Fred Korematsu cases, on the brutal murder of Vincent Chin, the Takeo Ozawa and Bhagat Singh Thind cases about US naturalization, the Massey cases in Hawaii, and tonight's Vietnamese fisherman case, all were made possible due to the Honorable Denny Chin of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, his wife, Kathy Harada Chin, and a team from our New York affiliate, Albany, that's the Asian American Bar Association of New York, who have written all of these case reenactment scripts of historic cases involving Asian American litigants. We are honored that Judge Chin has joined us tonight. He has been a beacon of the APA legal community for so long. Indeed, when I clerked for the Second Circuit over a decade ago, Judge Chin was tellingly at virtually every event for AAPI law students and young attorneys. Judge Chin was confirmed to the Second Circuit bench in April 2010. From 1994 until his appointment to the Second Circuit, he served as United States District Court judge for the Southern District of New York. Judge Chin graduated from Princeton University magna cum laude and received his law degree from Fordham Law School. He clerked for the Honorable Henry F. Worker of the Southern District of New York, was associated with the law firm Davis Polk and Wardwell, served as Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, was a founding partner of the law firm Campbell, Patrick, and Chin, and was a partner at a firm specializing in labor and employment law, Vladek, Waldman, and Engelhard, PC. Judge Chin was born in Hong Kong. He was the first Asian American appointed as United States District Court outside of the Ninth Circuit, and the first Asian American appointed to the Second Circuit. He served as president of Albany from 1992 to 1993. He has taught Asian Americans and the law at Fordham, Harvard, and Yale Law Schools. We are thrilled to have you introduce our event, Judge Chin, and without further ado, I will pass the virtual mic over to you.
Erica, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I'm delighted to be here. In fact, I'm learning a lot. Albany has not done a virtual reenactment yet, and so I'm taking notes, and we'll see how it goes tonight. I met a few weeks ago with Anjum and Melissa, and they asked me to talk about our reenactments. And so I'm going to do that for just a little bit before you see the actual reenactment. I have a few slides, which I will share. Albany has done 12 original reenactments, but this is the first one we did. It's not a mistake. The very first reenactment that Albany did was the trial of Ethel Rosenberg. We had done this with the Federal Bar Council in of court, and we wound up doing it with Albany. And we enjoyed the experience so much that we decided we wanted to find an Asian American case. And naturally, we wanted to do the Korematsu case, but there was no trial transcript. And so we wound up doing the Yasui case. We were able to find a transcript for Minoru Yasui. And thereafter, we did a new one each year, unveiling the new reenactment at the NAPABA convention. And so the only year we've missed was this last year because of the pandemic. We started off with Yasui, who was a lawyer, who was one of the internment cases, detention cases during World War II. Then we did the Vincent Chin case, of course. We did the Massey trials. And you can see these are the little posters we had, and each one gives the date and the convention. The trial of Tokyo Rose, I don't think I heard you mention it, that's a terrific reenactment. Race, Color, and Citizenship, Ozawa and Finn, and this was about two cases that made it to the Supreme Court where the two individuals wanted to become US citizens and could not because of the statute that limited citizenship naturalization to free white persons and persons of African descent. We then did the Heart Mountain draft resistors, individuals who refused to report for the draft because they and their families were locked up in internment camps, in concentration camps. And at one point, Kathy and I actually went to Wyoming, where we were able to go to, there's a museum on the site now, and we were able to do the reenactment in Cody, Wyoming, just a few miles from Heart Mountain. 22 Liu Chinese women. This is the first case to involving Asian American litigants to go to the Supreme Court. It's a case that is still very relevant today. Ward's Cove Packing, Title VII disparate impact case featuring the great Judge Thomas Tang. And we picked it in part because the convention that year was in Arizona. The Vietnamese fisherman case. Oyama versus California, which is the alien land law case. We picked it that year because it takes place in San Diego, and indeed the conference was in San Diego that year. Then we did Korematsu for the first time. We had been looking for a Korean case, and we found a Korean case, the Chosu Lee case, which took place in Los Angeles. We did this one. And then finally, we did the Korematsu case again in 2019 to mark Mr. Korematsu's 100th birthday, what would have been his 100th birthday. And we did it as a plenary session with 900 people watching. A number of the original participants from the Quorum Nobis cases came back, including Judge Patel herself, Dale Manami, Judge Ed Chen, Karen Nagasaki, and Karen Korematsu was there and played herself. The Vincent Chin case, by the way, has been done 25 or 30 times all around the country. We even did it in Switzerland. One year, Kathy and I traveled to Switzerland and did it with the Chicago Bar Association and European lawyers. And obviously, it is a case that is very much relevant today. Let me stop sharing my slides. So Kathy and I are the principal authors, but these are very much a group effort. We have 15, 16, 18 people at Albany over the years who have participated in the writing and the presentation. We've also on occasion ventured beyond Asian American scripts. We've done some programs with the Second Circuit. We did a terrific reenactment on James Meredith suing to get into Ole Miss. We were asked by Judge Ann Williams to do that for the Just the Beginning Foundation and had a very successful program. And by the way, Erica mentioned that I started teaching Asian Americans in the law. It was because of these reenactments. These reenactments really piqued my interest in Asian American legal history. So when I met with Angela and Melissa, they actually gave me 5 questions to answer. How did Albany get started doing these reenactments? Why are these cases important, not just to Asian Americans, but to all Americans? How do these cases relate to today? Are there other cases that might make good reenactments? And is there anything special or unique about APABA, about the reenactment tonight, the one that APABA DC is doing, the Vietnamese fisherman's case? And then they said I had 8 to 10 minutes to answer these questions. I will do my best. So how did we get started? Well, I mentioned the Ethel Rosenberg reenactment. That was something I had done with the Federal Bar Council in of court. And at some point, the Albany Litigation Committee was looking for a program. And so we wondered, is a program about Ethel Rosenberg relevant to the Asian American community? And we decided absolutely it was relevant. It was a big hit. One of the public radio stations even recorded one of our rehearsals and did a program on the reenactment. And so, as I mentioned, we decided to do some Asian American ones, and we have not stopped doing them. And the entire, I mean, as I was watching, I could tell that as I was watching the mic check and listening to the discussions, you could see that there's a lot of work in these programs, and you're getting the scripts ready-made. And can you imagine what happens if you sit down and try to start one from scratch? But the entire process is incredibly instructive and educational and gratifying. First thing is we pick a case, we pick a topic, we research it, we write it, we try to find transcripts, original documents. There's an editing process, we do the rehearsals, and then we present it. And then we sit back and watch as other organizations have taken our script. So it's been incredibly gratifying. So the importance of the cases, not just to Asian Americans, but to all Americans. And indeed, I think we really, all Americans can learn a lot from these reenactments. These cases show us how the Constitution works, how it is supposed to work, and unfortunately, how often the Constitution does not work. There are great stories involved, the people involved. You know, any good trial lawyer, any good judge will tell you, you know, it's about storytelling. And that's a big part of what we're doing, is telling the story. And as we select a case for this, there has to be a good story. And what we see is how hard Asian Americans fought for their rights. Chinese laborers, Chinese laundrymen, Japanese farmers, Filipino cannery workers, Vietnamese fishermen. And there are many lessons to be learned. And by the way, back then, you know, at the time of Yik Wo, for example, and some of those other early cases, there were no pro bono lawyers, there were no public interest lawyers. But yet these laborers, these laundrymen were able to afford high-priced lawyers, lawyers who usually represented railroads and banks, you know, and how were they able to do that? But they pooled their money, you know, they collected their money, and they felt so strongly about these issues. They hired these important lawyers. So we have two websites. Albany has a website where we've posted all of our reenactments, the 12 of them. The Second Circuit has actually stolen the idea. The Second Circuit has a civic education program, and we have a couple of pages, a few pages devoted to reenactments. And it's the same concept as the Albany website. Schools, bar associations, civic organizations. At one point, we had a church, you know, ask for scripts. So they look on the website, they see something that interests them, they can ask for the scripts and the photos. And the programs have also been used at diversity events, at law firms. Another thought that struck me as I was watching the mic check was the large group of diverse people. And that's one of the beauties of these programs, because you have 15, 16, 18, 20 actors. And a law firm, for example, will have the senior partner take a part. There will be a secretary, someone from the accounting department, a paralegal. And it's great when different people from different parts of the firm participate in these events. How do these cases relate today? Question number 3. Well, as I mentioned, we've tried to pick cases that present issues of continuing concern, legal issues that still reverberate. 22 lewd Chinese women, you know, trafficking. Some of that is relevant in light of what happened recently, you know, how Asian American women were treated. Cho Soo Lee, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, you know, particularly when there are different races and cultures involved. What does it mean to be a citizen, a US citizen, Ozawa and Finn? The pressures put on our system of justice in times of national crisis, war, and of course, race-based violence, the roots and causes of racism. Other cases, other ideas for scripts. Well, there are a bunch. I don't want to give away too many ideas since we're still at this ourselves. Yik Wo v. Hopkins, the Chinese laundry case. There are actually a couple of bubonic plague cases from the turn of the century that are equal protection cases that, of course, are very timely in light of the pandemic. One of my favorite cases is a case called How Ah Cow, the pigtail ordinance case. A Chinaman had his pigtail cut off by the sheriff, and he wound up suing the sheriff for damages, and he won. Anti-miscegenation. There are a couple of cases involving Filipinos in mixed marriages. Education, Tate v. Hurley and Gonglum v. Rice. I've envisioned a program on spies. In addition to Tokyo Rose, you have Wenho Lee, you have other more recent cases. Birthright citizenship, the Wong Kim Ark case, is also a hot topic in recent years. And, you know, we're always looking for ideas. Sometimes people read something, see something, and they shoot us an email with an idea. I even picked up an idea at a bar in Los Angeles. I was there attending a conference. I went down to the bar for a drink. I ran into Professor Jack Chin, and I said, we've been looking for a Korean case. And he suggested Cho-Soo Lee. And so finally, just a few words about your program, some things of interest. I see that Judge Tran is playing Louis Beam. When we first started researching this, I thought we ought to have a Klan robe, a white Klan robe. And so I actually started Googling Klan robes, and you could see real Klan robes for sale on eBay and other places. And then I said, you know what, I better not put my email address down in those websites. And Kathy and I actually wound up getting a white wizard costume, a Halloween costume. Remember Lord of the Rings? And that's what we wound up using. In my class last week at Fordham, when we talked about Vietnamese fishermen, one of the students said it reminded her of what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. And it very much is reminiscent of that. It's reminiscent of what happened in Charlottesville. You know, there are certainly important questions about racism. Do we want to try to figure out why people are racist? Some of my students are pushing back, like, why bother? I mean, I guess my feeling is if we can figure it out, maybe we can help stop it. But the case also shows us what we can do as lawyers, as judges, as citizens. You know, Judge Hong is playing Morris Dees. Mr. Dees was reading the newspaper, read about the case, and what did he do? He picked up the phone and he called Colonel Nam and he offered to help, you know, and that is certainly something that we can do. And Kathy and I, when we were putting this program together, we had the privilege of having lunch with Mr. Dees when he was in New York for something. We actually invited him to come to Napaba where he could play himself. He was very interested, but there was a significant conflict. The same day as the Napaba conference was an Alabama football game. And so he was not going to miss the football game with his grandson. And so we had to do it without him. So congratulations on what I know will be a terrific performance. We are delighted that you are making use of our materials. And I will now turn it back to Apaba DC for the start of the Vietnamese fishermen versus the Ku Klux Klan. Thank you.
At dusk on February 14th, 1981, several hundred people gathered in Santa Fe, Texas, a few miles from the town of Seabrook on Galveston Bay. Many were local fishermen. Some were members of the Ku Klux Klan. The local fishermen faced stiff competition from Vietnamese refugees who had resettled in the Gulf Coast in the late 1970s, and they had asked the Klan for assistance. Louis Beam, the Grand Dragon of the Texas Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, addressed the crowd in his white Klan robe. He gave the federal and state authorities what he called a Grand Dragon's dispensation, 90 days to resolve the issues in the Bay. 90 days coincided with the start of the shrimping season on May 15th, 1981. Beam explained as follows.
If the authorities do nothing, this entire Gulf Coast is going to be a difficult place to live. It's going to be a hell of a lot more violent than it was in Korea or Vietnam. If you want our country for the whites, you're going to have to get it the way our founding fathers got it, with blood, blood, blood. The Ku Klux Klan is more than willing to select out of the ranks of American fishermen some of your more hardy souls and send them through our training camps. And when they come out, they'll be ready for the Vietnamese.
An old shrimp boat had been brought to the rally. On it were painted the words, USS Viet Cong. Someone poured diesel fuel on the boat, with the crowd chanting, fight, fight, fight. Beam set the boat on fire, shouting,
"This is the right way to burn a shrimp boat. This is in-service training."
In the weeks that followed, there was more violence and threats of violence directed not just against the Vietnamese, but also against those who did business with them. And on March 15th, 1981, a group of local fishermen and Klansmen, some wearing robes and hoods, some carrying shotguns and assault weapons, steered a shrimp boat up to the dock of the leader of the Vietnamese fishermen, Colonel Nam. They had on board a cannon and a human figure hanged in effigy on the rigging of the boat's stern. Tensions had been rising in Galveston Bay since the late 1970s with the influx of Vietnamese refugees. The Vietnamese population grew until there were more Vietnamese than American-born fishermen trying to earn a living from the limited resources of the bay. Here are Gene Fisher, the president of the American Fishermen's Association, and Colonel Nam.
I served in Vietnam, was wounded 6 times in combat, and now my government, the federal government, is helping these Vietnamese destroy my livelihood. We asked the government agencies to help us resolve this. They didn't do anything. So yes, I called the Ku Klux Klan so people would know what was happening here. What I want to know is, when are the refugees going to stop coming? You say you've never seen a good thing come from violence? Once upon a time, some men put on Indian clothes and dumped some tea off the boats. And that's how this country came about.
I was a colonel in the South Vietnamese Army. I've tried to work with Mr. Fisher. We signed rules of the water with him when he complained that we were not honoring the unwritten rules of the bay. I know that the bay is overcrowded. If they don't want us to stay, we would go. But we can't sell our boats by May 15th when the shrimping season begins. We need to earn a livelihood too.
The story of the conflict was covered in a series of articles in the New York Times. When the chief trial counsel and co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris Dees, learned that the Ku Klux Klan had been invited to help the American fishermen, he dialed information for Seabrook and soon reached Colonel Nam. Just a few weeks later, the Vietnamese Fishermen's Association filed suit in federal court in Houston, seeking an injunction to stop the acts of violence and intimidation. In our reenactment today, we will draw on transcripts of the court proceedings and other historic documents and photographs to tell the story of the Vietnamese fishermen versus the Ku Klux Klan.
First, some history. In 1975, after the fall of Saigon, the South Vietnamese government surrendered and the Vietnam War came to an end. Hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese fled, often by sea and sea fishing vessels. Many of these boat people were lost to drowning, pirates, and dehydration. Some neighboring nations were overwhelmed and pushed the boats back out to sea. Many Vietnamese refugees were relocated to the United States, with thousands resettling along the Gulf Coast. Many settled in the New Orleans area, drawn by the tropical climate and assisted by the Catholic Church. Another attraction was the commercial fishing industry of the Gulf Coast. Some refugees worked in seafood processing plants while others fished in the Gulf of Mexico in tiny boats so small that local fishermen were amazed. Some refugees had worked as shrimpers in Vietnam. They pooled their resources, each family contributing to the larger efforts of the group, and gradually the boats grew in size and number. Here are the director of shellfish programs for the Texas Bureau of Coastal Fisheries and the police chief of Seabrook, Texas.
The problem is that the number of boats continues to increase while the shrimp crop generally stays the same. More people are cutting up the pie into smaller pieces.
The American fisherman feels he can't compete. The Vietnamese live off of shrimp, fish, and rice. The American fisherman can too, but he's not going to.
As the number of Vietnamese fishermen grew, so did the resentment of established shrimpers. Violence erupted in August 1979 when an American fisherman was shot and killed by Sam Van Nguyen in Seadrift, Texas, not far from Seabrook. In the aftermath, Vietnamese boats were burned, a trailer home was firebombed, and almost all the refugee families fled, only to return when the American fisherman's own brother turned in a group of men in possession of explosives intended for use against the Vietnamese. Arguing self-defense, Sam Nguyen was acquitted. At the end of November 1979, the Seadrift City Council unanimously passed a resolution rejecting intervention by the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan did not succeed in taking a prominent role in the Texas coast issues for more than another year.
The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1865 by 6 veterans of the Confederate Army. It grew rapidly and evolved into a paramilitary vigilante force, drawing on the many bitter Confederate veterans in the population. Wearing white robes and hooded masks and riding at night, Klansmen engaged in acts of intimidation and violence as they sought to advance their agenda of white supremacy. At its height in the mid-1920s, the so-called Invisible Empire included from 4 to 5 million members. Membership declined in the 1940s, only to revive in the 1950s and 60s, a reaction, historians believe, to the beginning of the civil rights movement and the integration of Blacks into white neighborhoods. Homes of African Americans were firebombed and civil rights workers were killed. In July 1978, more than 3,000 men and women attended a Klan rally at which Imperial Wizard Bill Wilkinson called for the repeal of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the execution of federal judges for treason. The Klan first appeared in Texas in 1868. The Texas Knights of the Ku Klux Klan was started by Louis Beam in the mid-1970s.
The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971 in Montgomery, Alabama. Its primary goal was to fight the effects of poverty with innovative litigation and education programs. In the wake of the resurgence of Klan activity in the late 1970s, the center set up a system designed to track Klan activities and then bring suit against groups who violate the rights of others. They called it Klan Watch. When Morris Dees called Colonel Nam in March 1981, Klan Watch was still in its infancy. To that point, it had filed only one case against the Klan. Nevertheless, it had begun to track Louis Beam. He was one of a new breed of Klansmen, a college-educated extremist with his own paramilitary organization, the Texas Emergency Reserve. Members of the group trained 2 Sundays a month. They were taught military tactics, including ambush and counter-ambush. When Gene Fisher decided to call in the Klan, he contacted Louis Beam. When Dees first met with Colonel Nam and his lawyer, John Hayslip, he described his legal strategy. They would seek a preliminary injunction before the shrimping season began on May 15th to prevent Beam and the Klan from carrying out their threats of violence. They would rely on not only civil rights statutes and the US Constitution, but the Sherman Antitrust Act and its prohibitions against restraint of trade. The complaint was filed on April 16, 3 weeks after the meeting with Colonel Nam. Judge Gabrielle Kirk McDonald was the first African-American appointed to the federal bench in Texas, and only the 3rd in the country. She had graduated first in her class at Howard Law School, and then joined the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund as a staff attorney. She had been a judge for only 2 years when the suit brought by Vietnamese fishermen was randomly assigned to her. she promptly granted plaintiffs' request for expedited discovery and scheduled a hearing on their motion for preliminary injunctive relief for May 11th, 4 days before the start of the shrimping season. Plaintiffs were represented by Dees, Hayslip, and by two Houston trial lawyers, David Berg and Philip Zelikow. Defendants were represented by Sam Adamo and Richard Cobb of the Houston law firm Adamo and Cobb. The morning after the lawsuit was filed, Berg found an unmarked envelope outside his office door. Inside was a Klan calling card, warning him not to let this social visit by the Klan be followed by a business call. Shortly thereafter, he found another such envelope at his home. Berg tried to joke about the threats.
Beams facing his worst nightmare, a black judge and a Jewish lawyer.
The 3.5 weeks before the preliminary injunction would be action-packed. Depositions were scheduled to begin on April 30th, 1981 at the Office of Defense Counsel. But before the first witness could be sworn, a young photographer entered the conference room and started taking pictures of Colonel Nam and the other plaintiffs present. Dees put on the record what had happened and later questioned the photographer. He identified himself as Russell Gregory Thatcher, a friend of Louis Beam. He refused to say whether he had trained in Beam's Texas Emergency Reserve. Why?
Well, I'm a survivalist, and as a survivalist, I minimize my contact with the enemy under such circumstances as this right here.
And who do you perceive to be your enemy?
Well, I perceive you as one of my enemies. You're a tool of the system I find oppressive to basic human rights, those human rights as founded by the Constitution.
Are you a Nazi?
Yes.
Why were you taking pictures?
Well, this is a historical event. Any confrontation between the supposed authorities of the country and those that are subverting our land as opposed to a person like Louis Beam, I consider it a historical event, and it must be recorded for posterity.
Louis Beam arrived for his deposition wearing his white Klan robe. The deposition did not begin well.
State your name, please.
I respectfully decline to answer on the basis of the protection afforded by the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America.
As Gene Fisher had also refused to answer any questions, the lawyers agreed to appear before Judge McDonald the next day. But before the deposition ended, Beam wanted to say something, and Dees also wanted to raise an issue. Colonel Nam had noticed a gun underneath Beam's robe.
May I make a statement?
Yes, you can.
No, I advise you not to make any statement at this time.
All right, let the record show that the witness is refusing to testify, but he read some statement, an inaudible statement, in the presence of the plaintiffs. Records show that he said more Antichrist.
He's ready to recess from the point of origin of this deposition.
Let's go. We'd like counsel at this time to determine whether this witness came into this deposition armed. Mr. Cobb, would you determine whether your witness is armed?
You don't have permission to search my body unless you got a permit.
Let the record show that this witness has a weapon under his Klan robe. He's here in full regalia Klan robe, and obviously he has a shoulder holster with a weapon sticking out. I want the record to show it unless his counsel refuses it, and he says he refuses to admit it.
It's not up to counsel to admit or deny what's under somebody's clothing. I'm not clairvoyant, nor do I have X-ray vision, and I am certainly not in a position to grant anybody permission to search anybody else's body. and I see no weapon.
All right. Let the record show it is obviously clear and goes without dispute in my mind, and that's the end of the deposition.
In your mind, it goes without dispute, not in my mind. That's all. Thank you.
That evening, plaintiffs prepared a deposition for a protective order and to compel testimony. The next morning, a hearing was held in chambers with federal marshals at the door, allowing only counsel to enter. Beam waited outside, chatting with reporters. He told them what was in his tote bag and what he thought of Mr. Dees.
I carry my robe like a soldier carries his uniform. When I make a public appearance, I put it on. Thank God it's permanent press. Dees is a wizard. He's concocted in his black pot all these fancy words and phrases. These Alabama lawyers care nothing about the Vietnamese fishermen. They care more, I care more than they do, and I'm going to prove it. They're just concerned about getting the Klan.
On May 1st, 1981, Judge McDonald ordered all further depositions to be taken at the office of the U.S. Attorney, with a U.S. Marshal in attendance, and further ruled that no witness could carry weapons into depositions. No one would be allowed to attend the depositions except named parties, deponents, counsel for the parties, and their legal assistants. The depositions of Fisher and Beam were to continue on May 2nd and 3rd, respectively. Fisher was examined by Dees.
Now, Mr. Fisher, did you make any calls to any individual identified in any way with the Ku Klux Klan?
Oh, yes.
Tell me who.
Louis Beam.
Would you tell me for what reason you sought out Mr. Louis Beam?
To aid the American Fishermen's Association in its effort to limit the number of Vietnamese fishermen. Well, I gave consideration to different organizations. Me being white, I went to Mr. Louis Beam. His organization represents white Americans, his ideals not being wholly mine, but I didn't think I would have much help from the NAACP.
Well, what, if anything, did Mr. Beam say concerning your request for help?
He said that he would do whatever he could. He specified within the bounds of the Constitution of the United States, which was in agreement with me, and that was all.
Now let's talk about that February 14th meeting between the American Fishermen's Association and the Ku Klux Klan. Where did that meeting take place, sir?
Santa Fe, Texas.
I'm going to object to the use of the word meeting. Mr. Fisher stated it was a fish fry.
Well, was a cross burned at this meeting?
No.
No cross burned on February 14th?
The cross was lit.
Lit. Okay, lit. Pardon me. What's the difference between burning and lighting?
The way the Klan explained it to me, or Mr. Louis Beam, that the lighting of the cross was part of a religious ceremony. Light dispels darkness, and I accepted this. This did not sound sacrilegious to me, so I allowed this to be done.
Now, did Mr. Beam the group of fishermen, American fishermen and Klansmen there?
Yes, he did.
And did you hear Mr. Beam make an offer to American fishermen to train in his military camps?
Yes, I did.
Did you make a statement that the shrimpers plan to participate in the military training camp, sir?
Yes, at one time I did.
And was that in February of 1981?
Could have been.
Did you make a statement that we're going to train a squadron of shrimpers almost immediately and then train in squad sizes for better logistics?
I don't recall using those exact words, but that was my intent. Yes.
Has any, to your knowledge, American fishermen participated in any way in any military training exercises sponsored by the Klan?
No.
You've never told anybody that they were participating?
Yes, I told somebody that they were participating, but they didn't.
Well, tell us who you told.
Oh, I think I made a statement to the press. They asked me if anyone was going to the camps, and I said, sure, we've got a squad there right now.
And you were lying to the press?
Definitely.
Now, prior to the Ku Klux Klan getting involved in this matter, did you tell Colonel Nam that you were going to see that boats were burned?
No.
You never got on television and stated that you were going to see or that boats would be burned?
Possibly made the statement that boats would be burned.
The next day, Sunday, May 3rd, Beam appeared for his deposition, carrying his Bible. Dees returned to the issue of the intrusive photographer.
Did you tell the photographer about the deposition?
Of course I did.
All right, after telling him about the deposition, did you approve of his coming to the deposition?
I approved of him coming down to my attorney's office for two reasons: to make a historical record and to give me moral support.
Do you know him to be a Nazi?
There are no Nazis. World War II is over. You suffer from paranoia. You see, people are always trying to erroneously link the Klan with the Nazis. Now, I'm opposed to the Nazis. They're National Socialists. I'm a constitutionalist. God's law is in the Constitution. A National Socialist is fine for Germany. This is Texas. We've got the Constitution.
Dees also explored Beam's Klan background and his role in the February 14th rally and the March 15th boat ride.
Would you tell us the officers of your Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, their names?
No, I won't. I'm under oath not to reveal the names of Klan members. That oath was taken in 1969. I've never violated it and never have any intention of violating it.
Is that an oath you took with the Klan itself?
It's an oath I took on this Bible here.
Well, that's a Christian Bible there.
Yes, that's the Old and the New Testament.
Well, can you show me anything in there that says anything about the Klan?
I object to that.
I can show you a whole Bible that talks about racial purity and God establishing the various races, which if you were a true Christian, you would know that any attempt to subvert the races is an attempt against God's plans.
And so you're telling this court that you refuse to tell the names of the Texas Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
You can bet on that.
Now, at the February 14th meeting, did you set a 90-day deadline concerning the Vietnamese fishermen's situation?
I gave what I have termed a grand dragon's dispensation to the federal and state authorities, which means that they have 90 days to begin enforcing the laws on the books.
Okay. Well, what was the significance of 90 days from February 14th?
I thought that was how much time they needed. I later found out, by the way, that it ended about a week before the shrimping season begins.
Didn't it end on the exact date the shrimping season begins?
Well, that goes to show you how God works miracles. I had no idea when the shrimping season begins. I just said 90 days, and it comes out beautiful. The reason I gave the 90 days, people are very upset along the Texas coast. There's a great potential for violence there. I want to avert that if it's all possible. So I served as a moderating influence. That cannot be disputed.
Now, your statement, I believe, is we'll be willing to enlist any of our American fishermen to send to our training camps, and then you'll be ready to handle the Vietnamese. Did you make that statement there?
That is correct, except for the last word. I believe I said Viet Cong.
Now, do you operate military training camps?
Just a second.
I have to take the Fifth Amendment on that. I'm already under indictment in the Northern District of Texas for activities related to paramilitary activities there. And therefore, I cannot say anything. And I stand upon the Fifth Amendment rights granted me by the blood of my forefathers.
And at that same February 14th meeting, did you light a match or a torch or something to a boat that you had put 5 gallons of diesel fuel in and state that this was in-service training on how to burn a shrimp boat?
No.
Who put the fuel on the shrimp boat?
Someone did, but it was not I.
Did you light a torch to this boat with fuel?
Yes, I did.
Did you state this was in-service training on how to burn a shrimp boat?
No, that's not what I said at that time.
Did you tell a reporter with the Texas City Daily that this was in-service training on how to burn a shrimp boat?
I would like to answer the previous question, yes.
Are you aware, Mr. Beam, that in approximately the middle of March 1981, a boat loaded with people dressed in Klan uniforms and American fishermen trip up and down Clear Lake Creek?
Yes, I am.
And did you know anything about this before it happened?
About 20 minutes before it happened.
Dees completed his questioning, and after a short recess, the deposition continued.
All right, we're back on the record. Mr. Beam has a statement to make.
Is this part of your cross-examination?
You may ask more questions after we're finished if that's what you desire.
I do not intend to pay for transcribing the speech Mr. Beam makes.
It's part of cross-examination.
Well, then why don't you ask him to respond to a question?
All right. You have a speech to make?
I have a statement to make that will clearly delineate what is happening here in this dispute.
Would you please make it?
Yes. From the outset, I think that it should be clear that what is happening here today is proof of the Klan's claim that this country is disintegrating and degenerating. Anytime.
Talk slower now. The lady has to down. She can't write as fast as you can talk. You have to talk slow. Come ahead.
Anytime any out-of-state agitator, anti-Christ person is allowed to come into a state like yourself, Demon D's, to come into the state and ferment discourse between Texas people, some of whom are citizens and some of whom are guests in this state, it is proof of our claim. No anti-Christ person should be allowed to ask a Christian anything in a court of law. But why am I in this dispute? Why did I enter into the conflict between American fishermen and South Vietnamese? Because I love my country too. And I feel American citizens have a right. I'm in it for one reason, to see that the Americans who have had their government turn their back on them, just like our government turned our back on South Vietnam, May 1, 1975, our government defeated South Vietnam, not the North Vietnamese. The soldier in the field won the war. Wherever we met the enemy, we defeated him.
Add that to the record.
So let's give peace a chance. Agitators like yourself need to go back where they came from. Let us work it out amongst ourselves. And I ask the Lord to look over us and direct us in our current dispute. Let each man use reason. As the Bible says, come, let us reason together. In Jesus' name, amen.
No further questions.
2 days later, on May 5th, Colonel Nam was the first plaintiff to be deposed.
Now, there have been 2 boat burnings, right?
2 times, sir. First time, 2 boat burn. One in Seabrook, one in Kemah. Second time burn in Seabrook only. Burn 1 boat, but another boat scorched and burned.
And how did that affect the normal everyday fishing activities of the Vietnamese men?
That's not normal effect. Make them sad, make them angry, you know, and make them feel bad for this free trade over there.
They continued to fish though, didn't they?
They continue to fish, but they're afraid.
Now on May 15, do you expect violence?
Yes, sir.
And is that because of the KKK?
One reason.
What's the other reason?
The other reason, Gene Fisher told me, Vietnam boat will be burned.
Will be burned if what?
They said they'll burn the boat.
If what?
No, he didn't say if.
What was it about the March 15th boat ride that made you feel intimidated and afraid to go fishing on May 15th?
On the boat, have a lot of weapons on there, including automatic rifle weapon. I think that because they burned the Vietnamese boat, they say USS Viet Cong, they would light the boat and hang the man. We know that.
What was it specifically that the Ku Klux Klan did that caused you to be intimidated?
They give the 90 days to the government.
90 days for what?
To the government to resolve the problem. If after 90 days, May 15, the government cannot relocate the people from there to resolve the problem, the KKK will take action against us.
Okay, you understand them to say that they were taking action against you, meaning you and the Vietnamese?
Vietnamese, yes.
I think you mentioned the boat burning, the USS Viet Cong.
The Klan show how to burn the boat. They make us feel worry. We worry, all the Vietnamese fishermen that have their boat. They're afraid who will burn their boat. And so they feel intimidated. If you're in our position, you're afraid too, sir.
The transcripts do not include a description of Louis Beam's conduct during the depositions, but it was described in plaintiff's second motion for protection.
On May 5th, 1981, the defendants took the deposition of the 4 named plaintiffs in the jury room of Judge McDonald's court. Mr. Louis Beam attended portions of the deposition. While in the room, Mr. Beam sat in a chair against the wall opposite plaintiff's counsel, Morris Dees, and held in front of him a book with the word exorcism, printed in very large type on the front cover. Mr. Beam chanted something from the book or from memory while staring at Mr. Dees. He did this for a period of approximately 1 hour. Occasionally, Mr. Beam pointed his finger at Mr. Dees. After nearly an hour of this activity, Beam's eyes became transfixed upon Mr. Dees, and it appeared that he was in a semi-conscious state. He began to mouth in a clear and distinct manner the following words in the direction of Mr. Dees.
You die, you die, you die.
Gentlemen, I am not going to grant your request for protection by the U.S. Marshals. However, I am going to enjoin Mr. Beam and the other defendants from contacting plaintiffs and their counsel and from making threatening and vile remarks, unsolicited hand signals, and other distracting actions towards plaintiff's counsel, Mr. Beam. If you fail to comply, I will find you in contempt.
Also on May 5th, the day of Colonel Nam's deposition, the defendants moved to disqualify Judge McDonald on the grounds that she was personally biased against them. At the hearing on the motion, Beam referred to the judge with a racial slur and stated as follows. I no more have the confidence that I could get any fair trial here in front of you than you would feel were you to go as a defendant before a Ku Klux Klansman who was a judge.
I know the prejudice your people have had against the Klansmen.
Judge McDonald denied the motion, ruling from the bench at the conclusion of the hearing. She told the Klan leaders,
"You are not entitled to a judge of your choice. You are entitled to a judge who will give you a fair trial. I am deeply committed to equal justice under the law, and you will get it. You're entitled to nothing more and nothing less."
In her written opinion, Judge McDonald quoted from a decision by Judge Constance Baker Motley, addressing a similar motion by a law firm in a gender discrimination case. Judge Motley denied the motion, writing that if a judge's background or sex or race were by definition sufficient grounds for removal, no judge could have heard the case before her. On May 8th, the day after deciding the recusal motion, and the same day she decided the motion for protection, Judge McDonald attended the deposition of Phuong Pham, Colonel Nim's 13-year-old sister-in-law. She initially was too frightened to appear, but agreed once special conditions were imposed.
For the record, I think it should be known that I am present and I am Judge Gabrielle McDonald, the judge presiding in this case. My presence has been requested by the attorney for the plaintiffs. I have spoken with the attorney for defendants, who is also here, Mr. Adamo. He has no objection to my presence. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. And may I add for the record, I've been requested by Mr. Dees to have the defendants not be in the room during the testimony. We've agreed to that.
Fine.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you just talk to us just like you talked to me last night. Now speak real loud so the judge can hear you. Speak as loud as you can.
Okay.
Where do you live and whose house do you live in Seabrook?
Mr. Nam.
Do you remember that a boat did come up behind your house on March 15th?
Yes.
And when you first saw the boat, what were you doing then?
Oh, I guess I looked out for a while. I was talking on the phone. I hung it up and I went to my room. And I took my niece with me, went outside. I was scared. That's all.
Now, would you tell me first, what did you see on that boat?
These people wearing a white robe.
Did they stop in front of the dock here?
No, not really. They just quit going on. And then one person pointed in the house. That's all I know.
Okay, then what did you do?
I run in the room and I took my niece. She was asleep now. I run outside.
And how old is she?
I think right now she's 5 months.
And then where did you go?
I went outside because no one was home with me.
And what did you do when you went outside?
Bill was painting the house. He worked for us and he asked me what is happening. I saw some boats on the dock with KKK because they wear their white robe, you know? And so he went. He just jumped inside the house and he called the police.
And how long did you stay away from the house?
Since now, 3 weeks.
Okay, now are you afraid of the KKK?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I'm studying history about them. You know, the history I'm taking, American history. This is my first year, and I know a little bit about them.
And what have you learned that frightened you?
Well, they against Black, you know, and I watch television. I saw Luther King. He's kind of a leader of Black. I'm scared, you know, when that happened long ago.
And are you afraid to go back there now?
Yeah.
In the boat that you're talking about that had some KKK robes on there, men wearing those robes, did that ever tie up at your dock?
No, just went by. And the man point the house.
And it never touched the dock, did it?
No.
And no one on the boat ever got off the boat?
No.
Now, did anyone shout anything to you or say anything to you?
No. They haven't seen me because I was inside the house. They can't see me, but I can see them. But they didn't do anything. I kind of scared. I run out the house. That's all I do.
Also on Friday, May 8th, plaintiffs were granted leave to amend their complaint to add one more claim. Thanks to an anonymous tip, plaintiffs had learned that a student filmmaker had filmed Beam's paramilitary camps in the February 14th rally. They subpoenaed the tapes and sought leave to amend the complaint to include a request to enjoin Beam and the other defendants from conducting any guerrilla operations in Texas, a violation, they contended, of a Texas statute prohibiting private paramilitary training. When Judge McDonald granted the request, she gave defendants until Monday, May 11th, the first day of the hearing, to respond. The stage was set for the preliminary injunction hearing.
The hearing continued for 4 days. 27 witnesses testified, and the parties presented deposition testimony as well. Only a small portion of the hearing itself was transcribed. We reenact portions of the hearing, drawing from a few available hearing transcripts, court records, and Morris Dees's book, A Season for Justice. The courtroom was full when Judge McDonald took the bench. The plaintiffs, all refugees from Vietnam, had arrived in suits and ties. On the side of the defendant American citizens, only Louis Beam bothered to wear a jacket and tie. Other individual defendants and their supporters in the audience wore work shirts, blue jeans, black Ku Klux Klan shirts, army fatigues, and Nazi armbands. Plaintiff's first witness included an ATF agent who showed the court pictures of burned boats. American dock owners who testified about the threats they had received for doing business with the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese fishermen who testified to the acts of intimidation and their own fear. One fisherman's testimony was translated by his 10-year-old son, who wanted to be a lawyer and was allowed to sit in the empty jury box for the remainder of the proceedings. A critical witness was Margaret Anderwall, who initially was afraid to testify. Accompanied by her priest on the day of the hearing, she told Dees her heart couldn't take it. But when the time came, she took the stand.
Mrs. Anderwall, where do you live?
Galveston Bay.
Do you know Truk Kang?
Yes, he's a fisherman who used one of our docks for about 2 years. He never gave us any trouble. He's a nice man. He has a good family.
Tell me what happened over the last year.
First, in January, I received a card in the mail, signed by the Klan.
What did it say?
You have been paid a friendly visit. Do you want the next one to be a real one?
Why do you think you got this note?
We allowed a Vietnamese boat to be docked at our house.
Then what happened?
We got 3 threatening phone calls.
What did they say?
The first asked if I knew where my children were. The next threatened to burn our house. And in the third, the man said I would die that night.
How did you feel when you got these calls?
Afraid and upset.
What did you do?
We didn't want to make Mr. Kang move, but we had no choice. We didn't want to hurt his feelings, so we said he had to move his boat so we could prepare for our daughter's wedding. But no one wants to have their house burned down or receive threats against their life.
On the second day of the hearing, plaintiffs called Walter Wilkinson, a security consultant who was an expert on military operations and a former Green Beret. He had reviewed the student filmmaker's videotapes. He was examined by Philip Zelikow and cross-examined by Sam Adamo.
You reviewed the videos of military training conducted by defendant Louis Beam.
Yes, I reviewed 4 hours of the video depicting Louis Beam providing both classroom and field training to a group of armed men.
You formed an opinion on whether Louis Beam has used his training to form a military organization.
Yes, most emphatically.
And what is your opinion?
He is training a viable military organization.
What examples of discipline did you observe on the tapes?
They followed his orders. When he was head of the class, the only time they took their seats was when Mr. Beam gave them the command to do so.
What did you observe regarding training to act as a military unit?
He was teaching the team certain aspects of an ambush and discussed each member's responsibilities in a combat role, not a support role.
Now, in addition to command structure, discipline, and training, what other elements are found in the military organization?
There's also a mission, equipment, and uniforms, although they are not necessary.
And don't all of those elements fit an organization known as the Boy Scouts of America?
No.
They're trained, aren't they, sir?
Yes.
They have discipline.
Yes.
And they have command structure.
Yes.
They have uniforms.
Yes.
They have a mission.
They don't have a mission in support of a combat role, sir.
You would consider learning first aid in support of combat, right?
In a military unit, yes.
You are aware that the Boy Scouts of America are taught first aid training, aren't you, sir?
Very much so. I taught Boy Scouts of America.
And isn't it true that an attack from either China or Russia, a nuclear attack, is a possibility and a grave concern to this country?
Yes, that's a possibility.
And in observing the films of training conducted by Mr. Beam, did you ever observe any weapons?
Yes, predominantly the AR-15, a semi-automatic weapon.
And isn't the AR-15 a lawful weapon for a citizen to possess in the state of Texas?
Yes.
Did you train the Boy Scouts to deliver first aid in a combat role?
Negative.
These tactics that Mr. Beam was training the men to use can be used against Soviet troops, I suppose. Can they also be used against civilians?
Yes, they could.
Fisher and Beam both testified at the hearing, but only Beam's testimony was transcribed. Fisher at trial equivocated about some of his earlier statements, telling the judge that he no longer felt that way. As for Beam, he provided additional testimony over the course of 2 days. Although he had testified at his deposition that he learned about the boat ride only a few minutes before it happened, Dees was able to establish that a Beam lieutenant, Big Al, was aboard. He showed Beam a photograph taken at the February 14th rally.
Do you know any of these people?
I recognize the first, second, third, and the fifth man.
And what's his name?
Big Al.
Is this the meeting between the Klan and the American fishermen at Mr. Collins' property you're talking about?
Yes, they were at the February 14th rally.
That's Big Al with the bushy hair.
Doesn't look bushy to me.
Just looking at him, he's the one that kind of has a pot belly. His stomach sticks out.
He's definitely overweight.
May I see the photo?
Let the judge see Big Al. Now let's see if we can see Big Al here again. I show you another photograph, plaintiff's exhibit number 26. And you know Big Al pretty well, don't you?
That's him.
He's on that shrimp boat.
Well, I don't know if that's taken on a shrimp boat or not.
Well, okay. I think the record will speak for itself on that. All right. Now, yesterday when we broke up, I think we left it with your saying that you were really opposed to the Viet Cong. This was the real thrust of everything you had done in this fisherman's dispute. Is that right?
No, I never said such as that. Where did you get that? You may need to read the record.
Did you ever use your Texas Emergency Reserve military organization to train able-bodied fishermen? You made that offer, didn't you?
I did.
And then did you state publicly that you would train them so that they could take care and be ready for the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong?
I don't know what I said at that point. And, you got some kind of documentation and want to prove it up. We can establish what I did say for the court.
Dees then played the tape of the February 14th rally. And although Beam had maintained at his deposition that he had been talking about the Viet Cong, the tape showed him referring to the Vietnamese. Dees continued with his examination.
Did you make that statement, sir?
Obviously, I made that statement. It's recorded right there. I would like to qualify the statement if the court would allow me.
Just come ahead and qualify it.
Well, the statement was directed at a specific class of people, okay? Not Vietnamese in general. That couldn't be, because I'm on record as wanting to train Vietnamese to go back to Vietnam, okay? The statement was directed at Vietnamese who the American fishermen told me were threatening their lives, and those who might in any way violate the law and somehow injure American fishermen.
Now, the Klan Sea Patrol is something you discussed setting up by May 15th if the problem wasn't solved. Would it be something similar to the last Klan Patrol boat?
No, actually, I was going to escalate a little more because you understand in tension resolving, the same techniques that Martin Luther King used to use, he would go into an area and create tension. And that would force the local community to act. I'm not saying that I'm emulating him. I'm just saying that as a student of politics, history, and science, I know it works. Whatever works, I'm going to use.
You said you would do everything the last Klan boat did, except you would just escalate it. Is that it?
Well, I wasn't in charge of that mission. I didn't authorize it in the sense of doing so ahead of time. It would have been different if I was handling it, I believe. Number one, I wouldn't put women on a boat with men. I think the women should be at home taking care of the children. And I would have organized it in a more professional manner.
I see. Now, concerning your military operation, you've actually had the United States Army NOMCOMs and officers training with you, haven't you?
Yes, we have. And the reason is they say they're not getting any good training in the government forces because they've become so weak, inefficient. The quality of the troops is very, very low. And they feel that by coming around a group of highly motivated white men who want to learn and have a desire to train to defend this country, they can get better training, and they do.
Your witness.
I have no questions.
Well, are there persons who are actually in the United States Army who receive training at your camps?
They have participated in the camps, yes, and they are active duty.
So those are the ones who you say have told you that they have not received sufficient training?
I've had a first sergeant that came down and trained with us and said, he's not even allowed to give orders anymore to the Black soldiers, that they ignore him and they threaten to file complaints on him if he gives them orders. And he says it's disorganized mob that will break in the face of the enemy.
All right, do you have any more questions, Mr. Adamo?
No, Your Honor.
I do. Just one. Camp Fuller is located in what county?
Chambers, I believe.
Mr. Beam, the other two camps about which you testified, where are they located within the state of Texas?
Okay, when I say camps, I'm using that word for the sake of convenience. We have no permanently established locations. We train wherever we can train, just depends.
And in what county are they located?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
I don't know.
May I consult with the witness before we answer any further questions about the location of the training camps?
I don't know what counties they're in.
Under further questioning from the judge, Beam admitted that all three camps were in Texas, but took the fifth on their exact location. When the defense presented their case, they focused on recently passed state legislation that severely limited the number of persons eligible for shrimping licenses in 1982 and 1983. Defendants claimed that the tensions in the Bay had largely been diffused. Therefore, there was no longer any need for an injunction.
On May 14th, the fourth and final day of the hearing, and the day before the fishing season was scheduled to begin, the court ruled from the bench, granting the motion in part and denying it in part. Most importantly for the Vietnamese fishermen, Judge McDonald temporarily enjoined defendants from engaging in acts of violence against the Vietnamese. On July 15th, 1981, the court filed its opinion.
The court has heard testimony from several defendants that certain provocative and threatening statements admittedly made by them should not, for one reason or another, be taken as an expression of their true feelings. These statements, say some of the defendants, were only made for effect, to impress or deliberately mislead the press, or merely for the purposes of calling attention to the problems they perceived. The defendants assert that the recently enacted limited entry bill has quelled all tension between the American and Vietnamese fishermen. This legislation may indeed ease many of the problems once perceived by American fishermen. The court, however, remains frankly skeptical of the wholesale reversal of positions taken, in some instances, only days before the reputation in open court. Here, the very ability of the plaintiff class to earn a living is being severely jeopardized by the defendant's alleged unlawful actions. Clearly, it is in the public interest to enjoin self-help tactics of threats of violence and intimidation and permit individuals to pursue their chosen occupation free of racial animus.
On June 8th, 1981, the state of Texas intervened in the action. The Texas Attorney General took the position that Beam's Texas Emergency Reserve violated the state's ban on private paramilitary organizations. On August 13th, 1981, upon agreement of the parties, the court entered an order that converted the preliminary injunction into a permanent injunction and reserved for decision the only remaining issue in the case, whether to enjoin the military operations of the Texas Emergency Reserve. As the case proceeded, Beam's supporters received a letter from him that claimed victory at the May preliminary injunction hearing and asked for money to continue the Klan's defense. Here, a supporter reads from the letter.
Of course, no victory is obtained without cost and sacrifice. As a result of our newfound power, I have come under attack by the forces of evil, by Morris Dees, an antichrist communist who has founded a con game known as the Klan Watch. The cost to this point of 2 weeks of court battle in front of a Carter-appointed judge has been substantial. I am asking you to donate just 1 hour of wages out of every work week to race and to country.
We do not know how successful Beam's fundraising efforts were, but Judge McDonald ruled against the Klan on June 3rd, 1982.
Over the years, members of various Klan organizations have engaged in acts of racial intimidation, harassment, and terrorism. Members of the Ku Klux Klan are now engaged in military training programs in Texas and apparently throughout the country. The existence of Klan-sponsored military organizations which train people in the use of violence presents a new and more serious threat to individual civil rights. Regardless of whether it's called defense training or survival courses, it is clear to this court that the proliferation of military and paramilitary organizations can only serve to sow the seeds of future domestic tragedy and violence. For the reasons discussed above, the court is compelled to grant the injunctive relief sought by the plaintiffs in the state of Texas.
The Klan did not appeal any of Judge McDonald's decisions.
Judge McDonald later revealed that while she presided over the case, she and her family received death threats and one-way tickets to Africa. In 1988, after just 9 years on the federal bench, Judge McDonald resigned her position and returned to private practice and teaching. She later returned to judicial service as a judge on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and as an arbitrator on the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal in The Hague, serving until her retirement in 2013. Colonel Nam became a successful businessman in Houston, where he owned real estate and ran a Vietnamese language newspaper. In 2005, Nam was still returning to Seabrook regularly to visit his mother and local shrimpers, both Asian and white, and was praised as a peacemaker, still respected as a leader of his people. Over the years, Louis Beam was charged with a number of crimes. In each instance, he was acquitted or the charges were dropped, except in one case. There, his conviction was reversed on appeal. He later became affiliated with the Aryan Nations, and in the early 1990s, wrote about the concept of leaderless resistance, a precursor to the lone wolf terrorist phenomenon that is of concern today. As for the Klan, it still exists, still fighting for white power. There are active chapters in 41 states with an estimated 5,000 to 8,000 members. They still do cross burnings, but as explained by Gene Fisher at his deposition, they refer to them now as cross lightings because they are not meant to intimidate people, they say, but to symbolize their faith in Christ. Early in 1983, a letter arrived at the Southern Poverty Law Center. It is read here by a staff member.
Mr. Dees, it has been brought to my attention that you are still traveling the country practicing perfidy. I personally feel this behavior should no longer be allowed to go unchecked. I therefore challenge you to a duel to the death. You against me, no federal judges, no federal marshals, no FBI agents, not anyone except yourself and I. We go to the woods, your state or mine, and settle once and for all the enmity that exists between us. Two go in, one comes out. For a white America, Louis R. Beam Jr.
Dees did not accept the invitation. 6 months later, Klan Watch burned the offices of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Dees found himself on a Klan hit list. The center survived the fire. It has since worked to provide assistance to victims of some of the nation's most violent hate groups through the legal system. For example, in 1987, the center won $7 million in damages against the United Klans of America on behalf of the family of Michael Donald, a 19-year-old Black man whose body was left hanging in a tree in Mobile, Alabama. The center also won a verdict against a New Jersey provider of conversion therapy that claimed it could turn gay people straight. In addition, the center continues to monitor hate groups and other extremists throughout the United States. The center reported 51 active Ku Klux Klan chapters in 2018. Although the number of Ku Klux Klan chapters have decreased in recent years, The center has observed an all-time high surge in total number of hate groups. In 2018, the center reported a total of 1,020 hate groups, up about 7% from the previous year. In a speech Morris Dees gave in 2013, he described the start of the shrimping season on May 15, 1981. Once Judge McDonald issued the preliminary injunction, the Vietnamese were ready to launch their boats. But first, there was a custom of their country they wished to observe, the blessing of the fleet. They invited their lawyer to attend.
As I got there about 5 in the morning, and I was standing there in the fog, on the dock, there were about 50 or 100 or so family members waiting for the boats to come out. Half an hour, the sun still hadn't come out. And then we heard a diesel engine and a boat popped out through the fog and came by the reviewing stand. The priest blessed that boat and another, and then another, until about 15 or 20 boats had gone out into the open waters. And as I stood there that morning and the sun began to burn through the fog, I could see the sun glistening off the badges of the United States Marshals sent there to protect those American immigrants. As I looked at those officers, I thought about the majesty of our justice system. As I looked into the faces of these immigrants, I saw pride. Pride as they took a place at America's table, not just finding a place at America's table, but building that table to make this nation great like other immigrants who've come into this country time and time again and made this nation a great nation. I not only felt proud to be a lawyer for these people, I felt proud to be an American. For the first time, I understood that our nation is great because of our diversity and not in spite of it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anju Manwala, and I am Vice President of Community Affairs for APABA DC. And I am joined by Melissa Nanaka, the Assistant Vice President of Community Affairs for APABA DC. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening for a virtual reenactment of this very important case in APA history. The reenactment is one of APABA DC's biggest annual events, and we are so glad that we were able to present it to you this year, not only because it is our 40th anniversary year, but also because it is a timely narrative and reminder of the longstanding struggles of the APA community that obviously still exists today. Thank you also to Judge Chin and Albany for giving us the opportunity to reenact yet another script of yours, and thank you for joining us this evening. This reenactment would not have been possible without the hard work and dedication of the APABA DC communications and social media teams who publicized our event and our volunteers. We would like to thank our member volunteer, Annika May Mathis, high school volunteer, Simran Ori, and our board volunteers, Ethel Badawi, Erica Lai, and Lloyd Liu. We would also like to thank our co-directors, Nina Shu and Caroline Chen, who have worked tirelessly to adapt the script to virtual format, cast each of the judges, and direct the visual presentation of the reenactment. Last, but certainly not least, we would like to ask all of our distinguished cast members to join us on the stage. Thank you for dedicating so much time out of your busy schedules to rehearse and reenact this important case, and for seamlessly adapting to the virtual format. We are so fortunate to have been able to work with some veteran cast members again, as well as to welcome some new APA members of the judiciary. We hope to continue to expand the cast in the years to come to celebrate the addition of APA judges.
Thank you so much again to the judges. As we continue our conversation on combating hate crimes against the AAPI community, we invite you to a chat on Wednesday, May 12th with DC and New Jersey attorneys, General Carl Racine and Gurbir Grewal, to discuss how states can address hate and extremism and how progressive prosecutors can make an impact on criminal justice reform. Prior to that, we will also hold an event on AAPI mental health on Thursday, May 6th with Dr. Christina Hong-Huber, an experienced clinical psychologist working from a social justice-oriented and trauma-informed lens, which we encourage our community to join. Now we would like to invite you all to join a brief networking breakout session with the judges and attendees, which will need to be accessed through a separate Zoom meeting link, which Anjum will be dropping into the chat box right now. You should automatically be taken to the Zoom meeting if you click on that link. Thank you all again so much for joining us this evening. Please stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful night. Please go ahead and click the link to join the other session and you'll be placed into the breakout rooms.